This is Robbie McKenzie, Youth Ministry 6.3. I'm with
the only
Dr. Scot McKnight, who many books,
has authored many books, and is a prolific
and all things extraordinaire. And he has agreed to talk with me about his latest book, One.Life, that was actually written, I think, just a little while ago. It came out, I believe, in December of 2010. And I've enjoyed reading it and just wanted to ask him a little bit about that. So, Scot, I appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Robbie. I had to move. My signal wasn't as good in the back room, so I moved.
Okay. Yeah, I saw that. I was looking all over the place, but that's good. First of all, I'm just always curious about this. Maybe there was some series of events or things. What led you to write the book One.Life?
Well, first of all, I agreed about 3 or 4 years ago with Zondervan on a 3 or 4 book contract.
Okay.
And one of the books I wanted to focus on was on the ethic of Jesus and discipleship. And so this is the book that came out of it. It's sort of my attempt to write a book for the people I think who need it. 20-somethings probably are the biggest audience, though I'm very encouraged by the number of 50 and 60-year-olds who are reading it and liking it and giving it to their 20-somethings and having fruitful conversations. So it's a book written for people who need to hear the message of Jesus about discipleship, and it's sort of a Midwestern, low church, evangelical, Anabaptist version of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Cost of Discipleship.
Well, good. And so tell me, you kind of hinted at book about discipleship. What else? What is the book about from start to finish?
The claim is that we have one life, and Jesus calls us to give our one life, give ourselves to Him. So it's a book about giving our lives to Jesus, giving it up for His kingdom vision, and that kingdom vision I tried to break into its most basic forms of justice, love, peace, and wisdom. And I don't think I was trying to be socially progressive in choosing those topics, because ultimately I tie them all to the church and not to any kind of political party.
Sure.
So what I'm trying to do is cast a vision of how Jesus understood the kingdom of God as making itself manifest among His people and followers.
If you, and maybe this isn't the case, I'm always curious as to an author's favorite chapter. If you had a favorite chapter in One.Life, what would that chapter be?
Well, you have fun writing different chapters, and some of them are the use of material you've done before or use of lectures I've given before. But I think I enjoyed, let's say, of the chapters I enjoyed writing the most, the wisdom chapter, because I'd never written on wisdom before. I enjoyed, if that's the right word, the chapter on heaven and hell. I like the chapter on giving your life to Jesus, the one on the love of God as well. But that last chapter on the death and resurrection that Jesus calls us to give our lives, the cross as paradigm. I enjoyed writing that, but I enjoyed the whole book because it's sort of the way I'm thinking of my students when I'm writing this book, saying,
Absolutely.
This is what I want to give to you as my testament of what this class, Jesus of Nazareth class, is all about. So.
And speaking of your students, one of the chapters that spoke to me, I've just left the 20-something. I'm 30 now, but it's still speaking my language here. One of the things that spoke to me, and as a youth minister, I think speaks to my students, was your chapter, Justice Life.
Yeah.
And you talk a lot of at least allude to disengaged students who hear a lot about, and one of the examples that you gave, they hear a lot about gay marriage and all that, and topics about homosexuality, but yet there's not much discussion about, and you allude to the 26,000, so on and so forth, who who are oppressed, and so why is it that students are so engaged in ideas, in themes like justice and that which is injustice, and then when they don't hear their particular church context talking about that, they just become so disengaged in that context. So why do you think, and since you're a professor and you're in so many discussions with students, why do you think that is?
Boy, Robbie, this is a really interesting question to me, and that is, there is no doubt that in the last 15 years, American evangelicalism has adopted and has embraced, to one degree or another, and in many ways very much so, a social justice vision for what it means to be a Christian. And I'm not kidding you. I'm 57 years old. When I was 27, this would have been seen as nothing other than liberalism
and the social gospel. And all of a sudden, you have mega churches, pastors like Bill Hybels and
Rick Warren and Andy Stanley. All of these people now, and all the young pastors, they're all convinced that we need to have a social manifestation. David Platt, a Southern Baptist, is no liberal at all, and he has he wants there to be a social dimension. And for some people, it's almost like now it's new because David Platt has said it in the heart of Southern Baptist conservative setting. But this is a fascinating principle, and I think our young adults are nurtured in a public education system that is casting a vision in which Western Americans are the cause of social problems in the world because of our consumerism and our economy, our capitalism. And so there is a sense, not so much of guilt, but of shame about who we are. And I think this is driving a huge dimension, it's not all of it, but a huge dimension of young Americans concerned to be involved. And I think this is the way you see it, that it's driven by this agenda of a global problem that we've caused. My students, and I think you would find this with young 20-somethings pervasively, would much rather go to Africa or go to Russia or go to some South American or Latin American poor country, Haiti, in the Caribbean, and work against poverty than to help with economy or the poverty in their local community. They feel a problem about the world and feel ashamed that it's their problem, they've caused it. It's not so much guilt as it is shame. All right, now that to me is wandering into a thought that I don't talk about too much, but I think this is a huge issue at work. But at the same time, we've focused on Jesus in the last 20 and 30 years in ways that previously we focused on the Apostle Paul and Romans and salvation and justification. So there's also a strong biblical warrant. These two things are a heavy, heady brew of a world globalized context in which there's so much poverty, and our focus on the teachings of Jesus, which clearly has a kingdom justice, care for the poor emphasis, that we have a perfect storm of evangelical Christianity remaking itself into a more just society. My plea, Robbie, is that we become as fixated on the local problems as we are on global problems, because frequently our kids go off and work in global settings and they feel good about themselves and they have a great experience. But when they come back, they're not as committed to poverty because they were more committed to having an experience. I think we have to begin to anchor the social vision of Jesus as something to be manifested in our local churches, that in our church we care for the poor in our church, and we extend that care to people in our community, so that if people in our church, they know they'll be taken care of. I think we have a lot of people, a lot of churches, who are sending millions of dollars to Africa but there are poor people dropping out of their churches because they can't afford it, they don't have a job.
Absolutely.
That's not right. So, and it's not that I'm saying don't help the Africans. I think we should. But we need to manifest the social vision of Jesus in our church and connect kingdom to church rather than kingdom to doing good in the world.
Thank you so much. And I completely agree and appreciate that. Something else that struck me, and I know this is a bit random, but you know, something else that struck me as I was reading your book, and in recent release of Rob Bell's book, Love Wins, is the idea of the discussion again on heaven and hell. And specifically, you dealt with this in your chapter, Eternity Life. And you talked about hell. You said, you know, Jesus mentioned hell as well. And so my question is, why are people, and there's been back and forth discussion, and you've been engaged in some of those discussions, and why are people so concerned and even often offended about discussions when it comes to hell? And specifically, people get really offended when there's you know, not the eternal conscious suffering of people for moral atrocities, etc., committed here on earth. And so why do you think, and I'm just curious, why do you think there's so much discussion about hell and the idea of heaven as well, who gets in, who gets out? And even among my students now, I've noticed that there's this ongoing discussion, and you alluded to this on your blog, the ongoing discussion of universalism. And you talked about soft and hard, etc. So if you could just answer the question in any way you want to, but basically, why are people so concerned about this topic?
Well, hell is a fault line in evangelicalism. For many people without hell, there really is no reason for the gospel or evangelicalism.
Okay.
That essentially what God saves us from is eternal punishment.
Mm-hmm.
So that wrath becomes the central problem in that the gospel is intended to resolve. Are you still with me?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're going out blurry and pixelated.
Yeah, that's the camera.
Okay. So to me, it's a fault line, and it's a huge threat. If evangelicalism loses the threat of hell and the warrant of heaven, for many people, the whole message crumbles. And in the history of evangelicalism, I don't know about Luther and Calvin. I mean, they both warned about hell, and they assigned all kinds of people to hell, of course.
Sure.
But I don't think they were quite as obsessed as from Jonathan Edwards, and I'm not criticizing him here, but into American revivalism, where wrath and hell became the major ways of provoking decisions for Christ, and then in the missionary movement, etc. This became a foundation doctrinal identity issue for evangelicalism. Now, at work in all of this, so let's just say the first point is it's fundamental to evangelical identity to believe in hell. And hell has been traditionally understood as eternal conscious torment. At work in this also is a growing pluralism and universalism among evangelicals. I've seen some numbers that make me convinced that among evangelicals, 70% are either soft pluralists or soft universalists. Now, one of my friends tells me there's no such thing as a soft universalist. Either you are or you aren't.
Right.
Either everybody's saved or not.
Right.
And so there's a soft pluralism at work, and I've seen numbers as high as 70%. So let's just say that about more than half of evangelicals think that people in other religions, if they are faithful to that religion, people who've never heard about Christ, if they're good, will go to heaven. That undermines everything evangelicalism has been about for 200 years, which is that only people who hear about Jesus Christ have much of a hope And they quote Ephesians chapter 2, I think is where Paul says that formerly you were Gentiles without God and without hope in the world. So that kind of text emphasizes the standard perception that people who haven't heard about Christ are going to hell. When you start telling people that everybody's going to be saved, or that most people are going to be saved, evangelicals who feel that they are in the in crowd, the elect, the saved group, that's the essence of evangelicalism, is to be saved. All of a sudden you threaten the border and the boundary that they've been using over against people for 2 centuries. You're gonna create problems. And that's exactly what Rob Bell's book did. It stepped into a firestorm, a major storm of an identity issue with hell, strong theologians who love to defend evangelicalism, and a growing number of people who just don't understand how a good God can send people for eternal conscious torment forever and ever. They don't. So it's a big issue. And, you know, I believe this is a big issue for quite a while. I've talked about it on the blog. But I did not know Rob Bell was writing a book about this. So when I wrote my One.Life chapter, I was writing more into the context of my students who want to talk about hell, want to know what Jesus said about it, but also at the same time, I'm nervous about the kind of violence and vindictiveness that we see in the way a lot of people talk about hell. So I tried to present a view that eliminated that kind of moral problem, and at the same time was faithful to the text of the Bible. So,
very good. A couple more questions. You talk about your students, and I'm always curious. I wish I could talk to more professors who are with college students now, specifically in I guess a Christian context, a religious context. If you were to talk to a youth minister, okay, and engage him theologically in discussion, and say, look, I wish you would teach students more about this, you know, junior high students, high school students, etc., so that way, you know, they would be ready for this in college. And this may be just a crazy question. What would you wish that youth ministers, teachers, parents, mentors, whoever, what do you wish we would teach high school students and junior high students based on your discussions and with college students now?
I don't want to get you in trouble on this one.
That's okay.
I think we have got to abandon a gospel that tells people that if you accept Jesus into your heart and have prayed the prayer, done the thing, even gotten baptized, that you're safe. And I'm not against eternal security.
Right.
I'm not fighting that doctrine in this comment at all. I'm convinced that we have thinned the gospel to a breaking point. That gospel is so easy to respond to, and we assure people so quickly that we have created a church of non-disciples. I think Jesus calls us to give up his life, our life, to him. And so if I could give one thing to youth ministers, it would be to rant and rave about One.Life and get people on board that Jesus wants them, and he wants all of them, all of the time, forever. That's what I would be focusing on. And a gospel that Jesus is Savior and Lord, that he's Messiah and King, that he wants all of our allegiance, and he wants us to order our entire life under him. That's what I would tell people.
Great. Well, I appreciate it so much. This is probably the most important question, since you are, I think, a Chicago Cubs fan, right?
Yeah.
The important question is, how will the Cubs finish this year? That is the most important question of our interview.
Well, they won 11-1 last night.
Right.
They're on a roll right now, and they're going to win the World Series.
Okay, every year, right?
My son played in the Cubs organization for 5 years.
That's awesome.
And he's a scout for the Cubs now. So we're totally into the Cubs, but it's not been, you know, we start out with 2 pitchers on the injured reserve list. Now we got another one. We got one coming back. It's been a tough season for our pitching, and so we're not doing very well.
Are you a pro Ryne Sandberg for manager guy?
No. I mean, I didn't. That's Jim. You know, Jim Hendry knows a lot more about who should be a manager. I was surprised, I have to tell you, that Ryne Sandberg didn't get it. But if you were following the newspapers up here, it became pretty clear that he wasn't going to be a shoe-in. And Quaddy proved himself, and Ryne Sandberg has never even coached in the big leagues.
Oh, wow.
So there's a big difference between being a good AAA manager and managing billionaires in the major leagues. So I loved Ryne Sandberg, and I was glad what he did for the Cubs, but I didn't have an opinion on that one.
Well, thank you so much. This is Scot McKnight from his blog Jesus Creed. You can check that out. Just Google Jesus Creed, and also you need to check out his book One.Life and other books as well. Another favorite of mine is Blue Parakeet. That was one of my favorites as well. And Scott, I appreciate you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks. I hope you've seen Jesus Creed for Students. Have you seen it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because if you haven't, I'd send you a copy. But if you've got it, you know, you've got it.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay.
Scott, I appreciate it so much.